If you've ever felt watched inside your own home, or heard something crawling toward your bedroom door when nobody else was there, these two real stories will make you rethink every sound you hear tonight. Stay, because what happened next could happen to anyone. Welcome to Fear Files Whispered, where every sound in the dark has a story behind it. Tonight's real encounters will remind you that sometimes danger doesn't knock, it crawls. I moved into the little blue house on Sycamore Street in Portland at the beginning of October. At that time of year when the air smells like wet leaves and cold asphalt, and the sun goes down earlier every day, I had just gotten out of a long, draining relationship and wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could hear myself think again. The house wasn't impressive: one bedroom, a small kitchen, a sagging wooden patio, and a fenced backyard that backed up against an alley of tall, ancient pines. But it felt like a place where I could start over. My therapist said I needed solitude, space to breathe, a chance to get reacquainted with myself, which was exactly what I thought I wanted. For the first couple of weeks, the isolation almost felt healing. I worked remotely as a freelance illustrator, so I spent my days drinking too much coffee, drawing until my wrist hurt, and listening to the soft hum of rain against the roof. Nights were colder, quieter, and lonelier than I expected. But I told myself that was part of the process. Healing wasn't supposed to be comfortable. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had a strange kind of silence, too dense, too still, as if sound got swallowed up before it could echo. The backyard motion light also felt overly sensitive, flickering on with the slightest breeze. I noticed it the first night. At around 2:40 a.m., a sharp white flash lit up my entire bedroom. I sat up, heart pounding, convinced someone was out there. But when I checked the camera feed, the yard was empty except for a patch of wet grass and the shadow of the fence. I told myself it was a raccoon, or maybe one of the neighborhood cats slipping by. But the next night, the same thing happened at nearly the exact same time. 2:41 a.m., another sudden burst of white, the rain shimmering under it like static. Again, nothing on the camera. On the third night, something shifted. I didn't sleep. I was too tense, too aware of every noise. I sat in the dark living room with my laptop open, sketching absent-mindedly while keeping half my attention on the silent backyard feed. When the light burst on at 2:57 a.m., brighter than before, my hand jerked and I almost dropped my laptop. I opened the camera feed, expecting emptiness, but this time I saw something, or rather someone. Just the top of a head, barely visible above the fence line. Dark, wet hair plastered to a scalp. It didn't move, not even a twitch. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow or a branch bending under the rain. But the shape was unmistakably human. Someone was standing behind my fence, completely still, watching my house. My skin crawled in a way I can't fully describe, like something inside my ribs folded in on itself. I told myself maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe someone was just cutting through the alley. Maybe. But neighbors don't stand motionless at 3 in the morning with their head barely peeking over the fence. I stared at the screen, waiting for the figure to move, to reveal itself more clearly or disappear. But it stayed there, frozen, as though it had been waiting for me to look at it. After maybe 20 seconds, the motion light turned off, plunging the yard into darkness. And the head, if it was even real, vanished with it. I barely slept after that, I told myself it was a one-time thing. Stress, imagination, eyes playing tricks. But the next night, at 2:40 a.m. on the dot, the light snapped on again. I didn't even need to check the camera to know something was wrong. My entire body went rigid, like my bones recognized a threat before my brain could process anything. When I opened the feed, I saw nothing at first. The yard was empty, but the fence looked different. There was a tiny gap between the boards that hadn't been there before, and through that gap, I saw an eye. Just one, perfectly still, glinting faintly in the reflection of the motion light, watching me. I don't know how long it stared. I don't know how long I stared back. My breathing grew uneven, the edges of my vision tightening like I was about to faint. I grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency police line, trying to convince myself I wasn't overreacting. 2 officers came by, walked around the yard, shined their flashlights into the alley, and told me there were signs someone had been standing behind the fence. Subtle impressions in the mud. Not footprints exactly, more like smudges, like someone had been shifting their weight or dragging something. They told me to call again if anything else happened, but they didn't sound convinced. And when I asked if they saw the gap in the boards, one officer said something that stuck with me. These boards don't look pried or broken. They look worn, like they've been that way a long time. That didn't make sense. I would have noticed a gap like that. Over the next few days, I tried to pretend things were normal. I worked. I tried to eat. I watched mindless TV. But something inside me had changed. I kept glancing at the back door, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. I would wake up multiple times a night, convinced someone was standing just outside. My sketches became darker, more distorted faces with hollow eyes, figures half hidden behind fences. I wasn't drawing what I saw. I was drawing what I felt. The tension kept building, like pressure behind a sealed door. I started hearing things too, not loud noises, but soft things, subtle things. A faint click, like a step on damp wood. A whisper of movement against the fence. A dragging sound in the alley. And every night, without fail, the motion light flicked on sometime between 2:35 and 3 a.m. But the camera never showed anything again. Just the empty, wet yard. If the person or whatever it was still watching me, it knew how to stay out of sight. By the 6th night, anxiety sat like a stone in my stomach. I tried to go to bed early, thinking maybe if I fell asleep before the light came on, I'd miss it. But my body wouldn't let me rest. I lay awake, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the soft tap of rain against the window. And then, through the thin bedroom wall, I heard something from outside. Not the light. Not at first. A sound faint and rhythmic. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing. It was coming from just beyond the glass door of the patio. The motion light snapped on a split second later. My heart nearly tore itself out of my chest. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, opened the camera app, and what I saw made every hair on my body stand up so sharply it hurt. The man wasn't behind the fence anymore. He was standing right against the glass door, so close his face was distorted by the fog of his own breath. His eyes were wide open, his head tilted slightly, as if he were studying me. But the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach twist even now, was that he looked like he had been standing there for a long time, waiting. And he didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move at all. His clothes were soaked, clinging to him strangely, too heavily, like they were weighed down with something. His hair dripped, but the rest of him was motionless, frozen like a photograph. When I leaned closer to the screen, forcing myself to look at his face, he slowly turned his head not towards me, but toward the camera, like he knew I was watching through it. The feed flickered, his face blurred into static. Then the screen went completely black. The moment the camera feed went black, the house seemed to exhale into a deeper darkness, and I felt something inside me snap, this primal instinct that screamed, run, hide, disappear. I backed away from the glass door so fast I nearly tripped over the coffee table, and every step I took felt like moving through thick water, slow and helpless. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering to the operator because I was terrified the man outside would hear me, even though logic said he already knew exactly where I was. While I was on the phone, I heard a soft tapping against the glass, slow, rhythmic, deliberate, not knocking. More like someone dragging a fingernail just lightly enough to let me know they were still there. The operator told me to lock myself in a room and wait for officers to arrive. I sprinted to my bedroom, shut the door, pushed my dresser in front of it, even though it probably wouldn't stop anyone, and curled up behind the bed with the phone still pressed to my ear. The tapping against the glass grew louder, then stopped suddenly. The silence was suffocating. I held my breath, listening to the hum of blood in my ears. Then I heard footsteps, not on the patio, but along the side of the house. Slow steps that paused every few beats, as if the person was stopping to listen, to think, to decide. When the footsteps reached the far wall, something scraped lightly against the siding, traveling upward, like fingers dragging toward a window. My window. I pressed myself flatter against the floor, covering my mouth, fighting the urge to cry. For a moment, the world went still. Then the motion light outside my bedroom window flicked on, and soft, shallow breathing filtered through the thin wall. So close it felt like it was in the room with me. The police sirens arrived a minute later, but it felt like an hour. Red and blue light flashed through the curtains, and just like that, the breathing stopped. The officers found muddy prints on the patio, smeared and strange, as if the person had been dragging their feet or twisting them into the boards. They found more along the side of the house, but they couldn't tell which direction the person went. The alley behind the fence was empty, drenched in rain, offering no answers. The gap in the fence that I had seen earlier looked older than ever, weathered, splintered, fraying at the edges like it had been there for years. One officer asked if I was sure I hadn't just noticed it before. I didn't even bother arguing. How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? I spent the next morning packing whatever I could fit into my car. I didn't care about the lease. I didn't care about losing the deposit. I just needed to leave that house behind. Before I left, I forced myself to check the backyard one last time. The air was colder than usual, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. The fence loomed tall and still, the gap between the boards now seeming too narrow for anyone to look through. But I knew what I had seen. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye on the inside of the glass door, far down near the bottom corner, where condensation had dried. A smudge, the shape of a handprint, fingers long, almost unnaturally so, pressed against the glass. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I locked the door behind me, left the key on the counter, and drove away without looking back. For weeks afterward, I tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. I moved into a small apartment closer to the city, where I wouldn't be alone, where noise was constant, where motion lights didn't trigger in the dead of night. I went to therapy twice a week, trying to talk through what happened. But every time I described the man's stillness, his dripping clothes, the way he tilted his head toward the camera, something in my therapist's face changed subtle, like she was trying to hide skepticism mixed with discomfort. "Trauma can distort perception," she said gently, "more than once. The mind fills in details when it feels threatened." Maybe she was right, maybe. But if my mind had fabricated the details, why did the fear still feel so real? Why did I wake up every night at almost the exact same time, 2:40, 2:41, 2:42 a.m. heart pounding, convinced the motion light outside my old bedroom window had just snapped on? Why did I dream of the fence, the gap, the single staring eye? A month after I moved, I got a call from the landlord of the Sycamore Street house. He asked if I had ever had issues with raccoons or neighborhood kids, a strange question. I told him no and asked why. He hesitated before saying that the new tenant reported hearing someone in the backyard at night. Motion light turning on. Sounds against the fence. Footsteps along the patio. The tenant complained that sometimes, when he woke up at night, he felt like someone was standing just outside the bedroom window. I didn't say anything. What could I say? The landlord sighed, sounding unsettled. "You know," he said quietly, "the fence behind that house. It's older than the property itself. Built before the alley existed. Some people say there used to be a house back there, a long time ago, before the fire. But nobody really knows." I didn't respond. My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day staring at my apartment's balcony door, unable to shake the sense that the past wasn't done with me. That night, at exactly 2:40 a.m., I jolted awake. Ice-cold fear slicing into me before I even understood why. My bedroom was dark, but something felt wrong, air thicker, heavier, like the room was holding its breath. I turned slowly toward the balcony door. The motion light outside flicked on. For a moment, I saw nothing but the pale glow against the railing. Nothing beyond it, just empty night. But then just for a second, a single heartbeat, I saw the outline of someone tall, motionless, standing at the far end of the balcony, half hidden in shadow, watching, waiting. And before I could scream, before I could move, the light flicked off again. I never believed in anything supernatural until the winter I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, renting a small, aging cabin on the edge of the Coconino National Forest. I had taken the place because I needed distance from Phoenix, distance from the relationship that had collapsed under the weight of my workaholic tendencies, and distance from the life I felt I had ruined. The cabin wasn't special. In fact, it was borderline depressing with its sagging porch and the smell of pine and old insulation. But it was cheap, quiet, and isolated, which is exactly what I thought I wanted. At first, the forest behind the cabin stretched for miles, dense with ponderosa pines that creaked loudly whenever wind rolled down from the mountains. The first night I stayed there, I remember lying in bed with that sound echoing like distant groans, almost rhythmic, in a way that made me think of someone shifting their weight on an old rope swing. But I kept telling myself I was projecting. I was anxious and lonely, and overthinking everything after the breakup. The air was cold enough that each breath felt sharp, and the cabin's old heater made a clicking sound every few minutes, like something tapping lightly from inside the walls. Little things like that are easy to ignore when you're emotionally worn down. You convince yourself that nothing is wrong because you can't handle the idea that something might be. Still, there were signs from the beginning. The second night, I heard something like scratching under the floorboards. Not fast scratching, like a mouse or squirrel. Slow dragging, like someone pulling their nails in long arcs against the wood. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, the kind of breath that feels too heavy in your chest, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. Just the wind pressing against the side of the cabin. I forced myself to lie back down, but I didn't fall asleep for another 2 hours. The next morning, when I walked outside, there were marks in the snow leading toward the underside of the cabin. Thin, uneven trails that weren't shaped like animal prints. More like grooves made by something dragging itself. Something that didn't step so much as pull. I stared at them for a long minute, telling myself maybe a raccoon had limped through overnight, but deep down something felt wrong. Like a subtle alarm bell had started ringing in my brain. I pushed it away. I told myself I needed to toughen up, settle in, focus on my remote job, rebuild the structure of my life after everything that fell apart. The cabin was supposed to be a fresh start, not a source of paranoia. But by the end of the first week, I realized the forest had a presence, a personality almost, that pressed against the cabin at night, like it wanted in. The noises under the floorboards grew more frequent, and sometimes I felt the cabin itself shift slightly, like something heavy had pushed against one side. One night, around 1 a.m., I was on the couch, scrolling absent-mindedly, when I heard the distinct sound of something crawling across the porch. Not walking, crawling. A wet, weighty shuffle that made the floorboards outside groan softly, as if whatever was moving had too many limbs or not enough strength to lift itself properly. My skin went cold instantly. I reached over, turned off the lamp, and froze in the dark. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pulsing hard enough to make me slightly nauseous. The crawling stopped right outside my door. Dead silent, the kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. I waited, barely breathing. Then 3 slow drags against the door. Not knocks, drags, like something testing the wood, mapping the surface, tracing the outline of where it would eventually try to enter. I didn't move for nearly half an hour. When I finally mustered the courage to peek through the small window beside the door, there was nothing, just the dark porch and the trees swaying under the moonlight. The snow didn't show tracks, just long smeared trails that disappeared into the tree line. That night, I slept with the lights on. The next day, I found myself questioning everything: my sanity, my loneliness, even whether I had dreamed the whole thing while half awake. To distract myself, I decided to clean out the small storage shed behind the cabin, something I had been procrastinating because the place smelled like mildew and rust. Inside, I found old tools, cracked jars, a couple of broken lawn chairs, and something else. A stack of newspapers tucked behind a rotting wooden crate. They were yellowed, soft around the edges, and dated between 1989 and 1996. The top one had a headline that made my stomach tighten. Local missing persons, cases increase near forest edge. I read through them slowly, my fingers going numb despite the gloves I wore. All the cases had something in common. The disappearances all occurred in cabins or houses located near the forest boundary. In one article, a local mentioned hearing things dragging around the property at night, shortly before his teenage son vanished. Another article quoted a mother claiming she saw something crawling toward the porch, but was dismissed as hysterical. A chill moved through me so abruptly I almost dropped the papers. I put everything back and stepped out into the cold afternoon air, my breath clouding the space in front of me. I felt watched, like there were eyes deep in the trees studying the way I moved. That night, the crawling returned, later than before, around 3 a.m., and slower, like whatever was out there had learned patience. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard the soft but unmistakable sound of weight shifting on snow, then faint dragging. Then the porch creaked. I felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it made my limbs tingle. I knew it was approaching the door even before I heard it. Something about the way the air felt inside the cabin, like it had turned thick and electric, told me the presence was close. And then, just like before, scratch, scrape, drag. But this time, the sound didn't stop at the door. It moved along the wall. Slow, deliberate, as if whatever it was studying the house, learning its shape, looking for a weak point. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep myself from making a sound. The dragging circled halfway around the cabin, then paused. Then another sound. Breathing. Quiet, but wet and uneven. Like lungs that weren't meant for this world struggling to function in cold air. The breathing lasted almost a full minute before it stopped abruptly. I waited in bed until dawn, unable to move, unable to think of anything except the horrifying realization that whatever lived under the cabin, whatever crawled toward my door, was becoming bolder. For days after that night, I stayed inside as much as possible, moving from room to room with the instinctive caution of someone who knows they're being watched. I kept telling myself I should leave, that no job, no temporary retreat, no attempt to find myself was worth staying in a place where something crawled around in the dark, searching for ways inside. But the strange thing was, every time I packed a bag, every time I told myself to get in my car and drive back to Phoenix, something made me stop. An uneasy heaviness settled in my chest whenever I tried to leave, like a pressure building behind my ribs, warning me that stepping outside at the wrong time might be worse than staying. I convinced myself it was just fear, trauma from the breakup, stress, the isolation. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I felt something else. Like the cabin wanted me there, like the forest wanted me surrounded. Every night, the noises grew stranger. Sometimes, I'd hear what sounded like whispering from beneath the floorboards, soft, disjointed murmurs, too distorted to be words. Other nights, it felt like something was scraping the inside of the walls, moving slowly from corner to corner, as if learning the structure of the house from within. I barely slept. When I did, I had dreams of long, dark shapes dragging themselves through the pines, pulling pale limbs behind them, leaving trails that the snow tried but failed to cover. 3 nights after the last crawling incident, everything escalated. It was around 2:40 a.m. I know, because I was staring at the clock on my nightstand, counting the seconds, listening to the wind, listening for anything else. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard movement under the cabin again. But this time, it wasn't dragging. It was crawling fast. Too fast. I bolted upright, heart slamming painfully against my chest. The thing moved back and forth beneath the floorboards, pausing directly under my bedroom, as if listening for my reaction. Then thud. Something hit the underside of the floor so hard dust fell from the ceiling. Then another thud. Then a series of rapid scrapes that traveled from one end of the house to the other in seconds. I grabbed my phone, though I had no idea who I would call, and slowly stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway felt colder than usual. The entire cabin felt like it was holding its breath. The moment I reached the living room, the front porch creaked. One slow, heavy shift, something was standing on it. I turned off every light, moving on instinct, flattening myself against the wall beside the window. I didn't dare look out, not at first. I just listened. The wood groaned under a shifting weight, then drag. The familiar, deliberate pulling sound. It moved right toward the door. I could feel its presence through the thin wood, as if something tall and wrong-shaped was leaning toward the house, sensing my heartbeat through the walls. Then, with a soft, wet exhale, it began dragging its hand, if it even had hands, slowly down the front door. I swear I could hear the moisture in its movements, like its skin was slick with something. My breathing became shallow and uncontrolled. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The dragging stopped. Silence. Then, 3 taps. Not drags. Taps. Like fingertips, knocking gently. As if asking permission. As if waiting for me to open it. Something inside me broke in that moment. I turned and ran into the bedroom, slamming the door shut, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything truly determined. The heater kicked on with a loud metallic click that made me flinch. Then, silence again. No crawling, no dragging, no tapping. Nothing. After 10 minutes of unbearable quiet, I forced myself to peek out through the blinds. The porch was empty, but the snow had new trails, long, crooked grooves leading away from the door and disappearing into the forest. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed with the lights on until sunrise, every muscle tight with dread. When morning finally arrived, something in me shifted. I knew I had to leave, no excuses, no hesitation. I began shoving clothes into a duffel bag, grabbing my laptop, my documents, whatever I could reach without thinking. My hands shook the entire time. I locked the cabin behind me and walked quickly toward my car. The cold air felt sharper than usual, heavy with that same pressure I felt the first week. Like the forest itself was aware I was leaving. Halfway to the car, I stopped. There were fresh crawling trails in the snow, but not leading away from the cabin this time. Leading toward it, toward the foundation, toward the underside of the bedroom where I had slept. I rushed to my car, fumbling with the keys, nearly dropping them twice. When I finally got the door open and threw my duffel in, a movement caught my eye. In the tree line. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting the branches, but then I saw it. Something pale, something low to the ground. Watching me, it wasn't standing. It wasn't even kneeling. It was sprawled arms or limbs, splayed out at angles that made my stomach twist. Its face, if it had a face, was obscured by shadow, but its body was faintly illuminated by the morning light. Too long, too thin, too still. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer, maybe a fallen branch, but then it moved slightly, dragging itself forward an inch at a time. Slow, almost curious. That was all I needed. I jumped into the car and turned the key. The engine sputtered. Once, twice. My pulse exploded in my ears. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. Finally, on the 3rd try, the engine roared to life. I floored it, backing out so fast the tires skidded and sped down the dirt road without looking back. But halfway down the road, my curiosity, no, something deeper, something like instinct, forced me to glance into the rearview mirror. And I swear to God, I saw it. The pale shape was no longer at the tree line. It was on the porch, upright, tall, watching me leave. I didn't slow down until I reached the highway. I didn't stop until I was back in Phoenix. For weeks after, I woke up at night thinking I heard dragging in the hallway. My therapist insisted it was trauma, the result of isolation and stress. She told me I projected my emotional turmoil onto the environment. But here's the thing, I moved into a downtown apartment. Concrete floors, no crawl space, no forest, nothing beneath me except another tenant. And yet, 2 nights ago, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke up to a sound that froze every muscle in my body. From the other side of my bedroom door, scratch, scrape, drag, the unmistakable sound of something crawling toward me. And I realized something I had been too afraid to admit. Whatever crawled toward my door in Flagstaff hadn't been part of the forest. It hadn't been part of the cabin. It had been part of me, and it had followed me home. If these stories made you look over your shoulder, there are many more waiting in the dark. Subscribe to Fear Files Whispered, turn on the bell, and come back for the next true horror story. If you can sleep after this,